Hello, I'm Alex Johnston. I run a blog called Hinterlands. I write things sometimes. I read a lot of books. I read a fair number of books last year, and these are the 10 plus a few cheaty little extras best, 10 favorites of what I read last year. I'm starting off with quote unquote honorable mentions. The list itself is entirely novels, works of fiction, but I did read a fair number of nonfiction books, and so I'm giving a couple of honorable mentions here. Also, there's a collection of short stories that I just wanted to shout out because none of my other books are short story collections, and I like short stories, so I thought I should mention my favorite one of the ones I read from the last year. So first up, I don't have a physical copy because I got it from the library, but somewhere right here, you will see a copy of 3:10 to Yuma and Other Stories by Elmore Leonard. This is a collection of Elmore Leonard's Western stories. I don't think it's all of them, but it's a good number of short stories, including the titular 3:10 to Yuma, which has been made into 2 Hollywood films. The first one I like a lot. The second one I haven't seen in a long time. So is it good? Is it bad? It's got Russell Crowe in it. So there you go, if that matters to you. The short stories are quite good. Elmore Leonard, obviously known for his crime stories. I haven't read any of those, but they're punchy, they're quick, they're very well described in terms of you feel like you're in the situation without them being slow or, they're not florid descriptions. They're just tight and they're sharp and they bring you into the moment and the moment to moment thoughts and actions of the protagonists. The protagonists are by and large men of action. They take charge of situations, they make decisions. And they move quickly, and you feel that in the moment. You feel the pressure of making these quick, hard decisions in dangerous situations. Lots of guys with guns, lots of shootouts, stakeouts, all sorts of tricky situations. And they're just fun to read. I really recommend them. It's a short collection. It's like, I think, 200 pages or less. I mean, I read it digitally, so it's all fake anyway. But, big recommendation from me on 3:10 to Yuma and Other Stories by Elmore Leonard. I guess technically Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles is short stories. It's a fix-up novel of vaguely related stories about Mars that theoretically make him narrative, but not really. They're mostly just short stories. But I didn't really think of it as short stories. I thought of it as a novel, so whatever. But that was pretty good too. Call that an honorable mention, whatever. My 2 honorable mentions as far as nonfiction books go are The Enchantments of Mammon by Eugene McCarraher. This is a very long and dense book about, it's on the Enchantments of Mammon, it's about money. It's about the kind of myth of the disenchantment, which is this era of the rise of materialism and science, the end of the kind of belief in magic and superstition in the world, where the world becomes quote unquote disenchanted. It's simply cold, dead material reality with no spark of mystery, the divine. And kind of the premise of the book is that this did not, in fact, happen. Instead, that the spark of the divine, we as humans invest it in things all the time. We can't help it. It's just what we do. And we have simply moved on from investing the spark of the divine in nature or in religious construction or in society and into money and business. Kind of charts that transformation from a kind of Catholic religious society that was kind of morally opposed to the gathering of large amounts of money, in theory, although obviously in practice didn't stop people that much, but then into kind of the development of Protestantism, breaking down these barriers, and the transformation of different strands of Protestantism into the idea of prosperity gospel, and then kind of the development of American capitalism and the kind of secular investment of enchantment into business and business practices. It gets into things like the idea of a business being a positive member of society and charitable giving and HR departments and all these different things. Eugene McCarraher kind of makes a strong argument. This is all kind of one story. And it does feel very helpful for understanding where we are today. And I think the purely materialist read of our situation that ignores the influence of history of this religious or magical thinking invested in these institutions, business and the making of money in general, is maybe misunderstanding motivations a little bit. I think it's helpful for understanding more than just the kind of practical material stuff. There's more than just the material behind even what seems like the most cold-blooded calculation. My second nonfiction book should be right here, is Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris. This came out a few years ago. It is a history of California, often centered on Stanford University, and all of the things of now come through California. Centralized banking, rich people, I don't know. The entire history of computers, Ronald Reagan, leftist political activism, the big union booms in the US. It all kind of happened in California. Building up this history through California, you do kind of get a glimpse into where now came from. It came from California. So much of what's going on in the world right now in this moment can be traced back to California in the 19th and 20th centuries. Not to say, that if it's all from California, like these are global currents, but California has been at the center of so much between Silicon Valley and the American military industrial complex. So yeah, Palo Alto was a very great read. I also got that from the library, obviously, which is why it's not here in a physical copy. But yes, I highly recommend it. Number 10. Kazuo Ishiguro's Remains of the Day. And I'm cheating also. Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. I read 2 Ishiguro books this year. I love them both. I refuse to pick between them. They're tied for number 10. I'll start with Never Let Me Go because I don't have a copy of it with me. I was again a library copies, and I'll forget about it if I don't talk about it first. Never Let Me Go is a dystopian, science fiction-ish literary novel from mid-2000s. It is about a group of children who are raised in a strange boarding school in the United Kingdom. They are fixated on and dedicated to making these weird art projects, and they have a whole strange caste system around whose art projects are popular and who takes it seriously and who doesn't. And there's a strange woman who comes and judges the art and takes some of it away. And then they get older and they write essays in a lodge and have sex with each other, and then kind of find out, and it's kind of been alluded to through the whole thing, that they have to kind of give their organs away. These children, and as they grow into adults, these adults are a group of people set apart from society in kind of a horrible way, and they understand that, and even though they don't know why or what's going on with them versus everybody else, they just know that they're marked and set apart from the world, and they just kind of accept it as the way things are. There is no movement whatsoever to kind of resist their fate. They just kind of live in it, as just as natural as breathing. Although all along they kind of dream in this kind of they believe in this magical fairy tale that if they're just the most perfect, best versions of themselves, then they will be allowed to be normal. And it's very, very sad. And it's beautifully written. Ishiguro is, of course, a wonderful, wonderful writer, skilled writer. Yeah, and that's Never Let Me Go. The other Ishiguro book on my list, Remains of the Day. This is about a butler. A butler narrates the book, an old school British butler. He was in charge of a very old, fancy British house that had a real lord in charge of it. The butler is narrating the book. He tells us about the philosophy of being a butler and different famous butlers and how they were good or bad at being a butler and why he thinks that they were or weren't a great butler, or they're overrated, or my dad's underrated. His dad was a butler. And that's all very fun. And then kind of slowly unpack his philosophy. For a butler to be great, the butler needs to be of service to a great man. Therefore, you live a great life by giving service to the great men of the world. If you worked for a Churchill or the people that rubbed elbows with Churchill and great men of British society, i.e. the upper class, the nobility, the lords. If you're a lower class person from the serving classes, then you can become great by being of service to one of these great men. And at the same time, we're hearing the story of his life. It's kind of told in 2 sequences. One in the present day where he works for an American who's bought this old British house just kind of as a thing for a rich American to do. And he's the butler's been sent off on a road trip through the countryside to go see an old acquaintance, a former coworker, to ask if she'll come back and work at the house. So it's this road trip. At the same time, we're getting all the flashbacks to his life working for Lord Darlington, who was the longtime lord of the manor. Many of the flashbacks are about his memories of the woman, Miss Kenton, the woman he's going to visit. Many of his memories are about Miss Kenton, and we learn about their relationship as the kind of parallel narratives of his trip and his memories unfold. Whether or not Lord Darlington was a great man, that it was worth spending your whole life in service to him, comes into question, as well as we come to learn of all of the things, the joys, and chances at happiness and relationships that our protagonist, our narrator, has given up to be of service to this possibly not so great man. Yeah, and it's just kind of brutal, but I liked it a lot. I mean, it's not a surprise, like you see it coming miles away. It's not a long book, but you can kind of, probably just from my summary, you kind of put it together. But the final little section is just an absolute gut punch. Reigns of the Day. You want to be sad. Those are 2 books. Never Let Me Go and Reigns of the Day. You want to get sad, read those books. Go for it. Number 9. Number 9. Holy Fire by Bruce Sterling is number 9. What a wonderful book. I had never read a Bruce Sterling before. He's kind of the I guess the number 2 or number 3 of cyberpunk as a subgenre, depending on how you define it. Number 1 being William Gibson, of course, author of Neuromancer, a book I have read and would like to reread because I haven't read it since I was younger, but cool book. Wild stuff happens in it. That's fun. And then there's Neal Stephenson, who I guess is also a cyberpunk author and kind of a big deal. But Bruce Sterling is there too. And this is my first book I've read by him. Holy Fire is set in like the year 2100-ish. The premise is sometime in the mid-21st century, there is a horrific plague. Can you imagine? That devastates the world, mass death, but the result is a society where medical technology has made incredible leaps. People are regularly living well into their 2nd century. And the result is a society ruled by the extremely elderly, who are permanently young, kind of. They're de-aged, so they look like they're in their 50s and 60s, but they're like well over 100. It is kind of a benevolent socialist dictatorship kind of world government kind of situation where seems like there's universal basic income and people are taken care of, kind of, but also your opportunities for progressing in society are pretty heavily restricted. Property and wealth is largely controlled by the elderly. You have kind of a social credit system that's based on how well you take care of your health, how well you take care of your body. They view basically the state is the one that's paying for these kind of life extension treatments. And so you need to have a good kind of health credit score for them to think you're a good investment to put, if you're smoking and drinking, forget about it. We're not going to waste an extra 50 years of life on you. You're not going to get the most value out of it, You're probably going to die. You're going to give yourself cancer and die, for God's sakes. So the protagonist of the book is an elderly woman who has lived a very safe and proper life. And she's now getting this hyper experimental treatment that is supposed to fully make her young for real. They take your brain out of your body and they acid wash your cells and scrub them down and they inject you with all kinds of crap and they make you young again. They make you literally like you're 20 years old again. And so she does this. She wakes up. She is 20 years old. And she's like, what am I going to live my life locked up in a tower, never doing anything so I can live as long as possible? I want to live. And so she runs away. She runs away from her minders and her monitorers who view her, of course, as an investment and that they're looking into this experimental treatment. She goes on the run. She goes to Germany. She goes and hangs out with some weirdo young socialists, anarchist weirdos who, of course, don't know that she's old because she's 20. How could she be old, She becomes a model. She hangs out in a bar with a guy who went to the moon and then turned himself into the Sasquatch. He's got fur all over him. And there's some very fun cyberpunk imagining the internet as a physical space that you interacted with gloves, haptic feedback and stuff. Yeah, and it's just very cool, and it's a fun world to hang out in. It's interested in people and thinking about the future. I had a great time with it. I highly recommend Holy Fire by Bruce Sterling. Number 8, I don't have it because I got a library copy. The picture will appear. It's Stoner by John Williams. Uh, what can you say? It's Stoner. We're all lit bros now. What a beautiful, beautiful novel. Stoner is the story of a guy. What a guy. He grows up on a poor dirt farm, goes off to school, goes to university for agriculture, takes a mandatory English literature class, and is so struck by a question his mean, rude teacher asks him that he discovers that he actually cares about English more than anything else and switches his major to English and then ends up pursuing postgraduate work and becomes an English teacher at that very same university, a professor of English literature. He has an absolutely strange life where he courts this woman that he thinks he loves, and they get married, and she decides she hates him, and they have a horrible time of it. This new guy starts at his job, decides he doesn't like him, and becomes the head of the department and makes his life hell for him. He ends up having a daughter with his wife, and he loves his daughter, and they have a great relationship until his wife decides to take that away from him, and she kind of separates them by force and messes that up. And then he ends up falling in love with this younger woman in his department, and they have have an affair and a relationship, and it's beautiful for a while. And then his various enemies conspire to separate them and send her away. Then eventually he gets old and dies. And at the end of his life, when asked by his wife and his poor daughter, who horrible things have happened to in her life as well, asked, oh, you must think Mummy and me are such disappointments to you. And he's like, no, how could you say that? No. Because he's Stoner, Life is beautiful, He got to teach English. What more could you want? He got to teach English his whole life. Isn't that nice? Don't you know? You're going to be a teacher. If you just read out the plot points, it sounds like almost like a parody of like the kind of 20th century novel, the literary novel, but it is just so, the writing and the spirit of the thing is just so loving and full of life and full of joy of living and loving. I can't speak highly about it enough. Just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful novel. Stoner. Don't feel bad for Stoner. He got to teach English his whole life. What more could you want? Number 7. This is The Baron in the Trees by Italo Calvino. It's a big Calvino year for me, as you're going to see in a moment, but this is the first appearance of Calvino on my list, and this is The Baron in the Trees, which is just delightful. Calvino's writing style immediately struck me as just this combination of classic literature, like it does feel a bit like a 19th century novel in some ways, but on the other hand, it also has this very kind of playful energy that feels infused with a fairy tale, kind of fantasist kind of way of speaking. And of course, obviously, I'm reading this in English. It's been translated from Italian, so the translator needs to get his share credit for either preserving or creating this tone. Presumably preserving. I can't read Italian, but there's a voice coming through here that I assume is not just from the translator. Nevertheless, The Baron in the Trees is a story about a young, the son of a baron. He'll become a baron when his papa passes away in Italy in the, I want to say it's the 18th century. He's fed up with his dad about something. They want to make him eat snails or something. He has a fit, and he goes up into the trees and says, I'm never coming down. I live in the trees now. And he does it. He never comes down his whole life. It's just the story of this kid who's going to grow up to be the Baron, who lives in the trees, and he, educates himself in the trees. He gets little books. He sleeps in a hammock in the trees. People bring him food in the trees. He runs around with a feral gang of kids who like rob orchards from the trees. He falls in love with a girl from the trees. He has affairs in the trees. And eventually when his father passes away, he becomes the Baron in the trees, and he, it's about his whole life, and it's this tale of like this weird guy and his kind of Robinson Crusoe life in the trees. Well, he's also a baron, and then it's about, also the history of Italy and like, the Napoleonic, the French Revolution and the invasion of Napoleon into Italy, and like this kind of movement of history. And it is so beautiful, and it's so fun. I feel like an adventure story in parts, even though it's also kind of this like silly fable in some ways. It's all these different things melded together, and the ending is very melancholic and bittersweet about this guy that lives in the trees and refuses to leave the trees, but he's getting old, and he saw progress come, and then reaction kind of washed it away, as originally Napoleon is supposed to be a liberator, and then both he doesn't turn out to be such a good liberator, and then on top of that he gets kicked out by the return of the monarchist regimes. But it's a beautiful story, and a really fun time. If you've ever read a Italo Calvino book, it's a great place to start. All right, number 6. Number 6, again, a book I got from the library. It's not here. Number 6 is The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. What a book, no joke. Very, very short. Clarice Lispector is my first novel by her. A lot of firsts this year. I'm really branching into literary fiction, which I don't really read a lot of, and just kind of expanding my horizons. And I had such a great time reading this. My edition opens with a little introduction and explains that Clarice Lispector is a famously strange writer. The way she uses her language in Portuguese, which is the language she writes in, is so strange and obtuse that very often the author gives an example of he often writes about Lispector in English, and when editions of his books were published in Portuguese, the Portuguese copy editors kept changing the direct quotations from Lispector because the structure and the grammar is so strange, they assume they must be typos or errors. But no, that's how she writes. And I think the translator has done a great job of capturing that, although obviously I don't read Portuguese, I can't say for sure, but it is a truly strange and surreal book to read. The sentence construction is wild, and I just had an absolutely great time with it. Basically, you have a very vocal and voicey narrator writing the story of this girl who is poor and ugly and dumb, and because she's not really aware of her, what's going on with her, she's happy even though she should be miserable. And that's the narrator is always talking about how much he is mad at her because she's too dumb to understand how miserable she should be, and also that he's jealous of her because she's happy even though she should be miserable. And she moves to the big city from a rural area, and she has a shitty job, and she gets a boyfriend who sucks and is kind of insane and is mean to her. And she just kind of eats hot dogs and ends up getting sick because she just eats hot dogs. And then she dies. And that's the book. That's what happens in the book, The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. And it owns. It's great. Just the writing and the interplay between the narrator and the lead character. It's very funny. It's very sad. It's very extremely weird. It's very short. I highly recommend checking it out. Number 5. Big boy time. Big boy, big boy, big boy. Dahlgren by Samuel R. Delany. Dahlgren is ginormous. What a tome. I read it for my book club, the Great Big Book Club, which is me and my friends read the biggest, bestest books we can get our hands on. Dahlgren was one of 2 we read in 2025. Book number 1 will be coming up shortly. What can you even say about Dahlgren? It's post-apocalyptic, it's literary, it's weird. It often gets described as experimental, and it certainly is not conventional, although if you've read really experimental stuff, you will find it very readable in comparison. But for science fiction by a major author, it is certainly extremely experimental. Dahlgren is the story of a guy who keeps forgetting stuff and maybe is having delusions and maybe has some mental health issues and doesn't know what's going on. But he travels to this city, Bologna, which is a city in the center of the U.S., where some strange, horrible disaster has occurred and it is largely abandoned. And the survivors and the kind of strange people that want to live in such a place scavenge from houses. And some of them just kind of try to pretend that everything is normal and try to keep living their lives, even though the city is empty and abandoned and, gangs are roaming the streets. And it is this kind of strange commentary on America and the 1960s. There's all of these kind of very huge tensions and incidents and flare-ups around race and sexuality and gender and, the interplay of these different things. And tons of crazy and horrible stuff happens in the book. The main character kind of ends up becoming the protagonist of reality through no real action of his own. Other people are just kind of constantly making him the person they need him to be for whatever narrative they're trying to tell. And he's also a poet, and he writes a book of poetry, and it's all this stuff about the insecurity of the artist. You know, he's constantly unsure that he's actually any good as an artist, and he just writes the poems because he wants to. And then he both wants and is terrified of and distrustful of validation. It's what I just like about the book is that it's just really, it's wonderful to read. I love the sections that are clearly supposed to be the kid's poetry, the kid being the main character. And I love the fact that it is this obtuse, messy thing that does not coalesce into something. There are no real answers. There is no key to unlock it. It just is a beast of a thing that you only are reading for itself, for what it is, not to solve a mystery, not to unlock a puzzle. It's just is what it is. And that's great. I had a great time with it. Dahlgren. Yeah. Hello. This is editor Alex coming to you live from the editing booth. I've been making this video for over a month now. Who knew that it was actually a lot of work to make a YouTube video? I shouldn't have talked for so long. Anyway, jumping in here to say that I am not really happy with the amount that I emphasize the content warnings for Dahlgren. Everything I say about the book and my feelings about it are all still true. I love the book. I think it's great. I think it's challenging, though. And I do want to emphasize that I am not like just unconditionally recommending this book to everyone. Please look up content warnings before you read it. A lot of like genuinely awful stuff happens in the book. And setting aside awful or not awful, there's also just a ton of explicit sex. People's comfort level with that stuff will vary. So I would highly recommend checking out content warnings before you're reading the book. And if you hit some stuff and you're just like, I don't think this is for me, feel free to drop it, because it's not a book that is, I think, everybody has to read this book. My recommendation is to go with your gut. Despite my feelings very strongly about the book, I really like the book. But I am talking to you personally. If anything I'm saying here is triggering kind of a warning response in you, maybe do some investigation on your own before you commit to reading this gigantic book, which is very beautiful, but also very fraught, extremely fraught novel. Number 4. One of the greatest books of all time. Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. Famously adapted into Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky, and of course into Stalker, the video game by whatever studio made that. Sorry. Roadside Picnic, just like a genuinely special science fiction novel. It hits something so unnerving and so truly alien and strange and unsettling in a way that very little else does. Stalker tells the story of a world where aliens have visited. I believe it's actually in the United States or maybe even Canada, in North America somewhere. There was an alien visitation. In the aftermath, the area around where they visited has become a strange, nightmarish place where there's all sorts of artifacts that distort physics and kill you instantly or cause horrible side effects or possibly create miraculous technological things that are immensely beneficial to human beings, or all of the above. And, governments try to lock it down and try and send in expeditions to like gather stuff and test it and all this. And there are people that go in illegally to get stuff and bring it out, and they become experts at navigating the dangers of the zone. And these people, of course, are called stalkers, hence the name of the movie and the game. And so our story is about one such stalker and his relationship to the zone over the years, his relationship to being a stalker, to doing these runs. Child who is born strangely transformed with kind of, we're meant to suggest kind of maybe hair all over their body, maybe even some other kind of quote unquote like primitive characteristics. They're supposed to look a little more ape-like because of whatever going in the zone has done to the main character's DNA. His child was born strange in this way, touched by the zone. And yeah, it's about how, he ultimately keeps going back. The lure of money or the desire to touch something beyond. And of course, the famous metaphor of the roadside picnic, which is that to humans, it seems like this immense, important thing that we were visited by aliens. They left behind all of these strange and horrible things. What did they mean? What were they trying to tell us? What are they saving us? Are they punishing us? And the guy, explains in his perspective, no, the aliens stopped off on the side of the road. They had a picnic. They left their garbage behind and they took off. And to the wildlife, which is us, this alien garbage seems impossible. To a bird, aluminum foil is like an impossible material, and maybe it'll kill them, or maybe it'll make a great nest, and maybe both. But to the aliens, it means nothing. It's just garbage, and their visit was nothing more than a little convenience for them, with no thought to the quote-unquote inhabitants of the roadside they stopped on. And that is cold and cool as hell. Number 3. The number 1 book in the Great Big Book Club. The first book we did, the highest rated book thus far, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Richard Pever and Larissa Volokhonsky. Specifically got this translation after reading a long thread by Tim Rogers of Action Button on his Discord about his opinions on the various translations of Brothers Karamazov. In his opinion, he speaks Russian or reads Russian, both presumably. This translation does the best job of preserving some of the structure and grammar of Russian, so that reading it feels somewhat like reading it in Russian, in that Russian grammar is, of course, very different than English grammar, and so it produces a certain effect that you don't get if you just translate the meaning, but turn it into a more traditional English sentence structure. So I obviously only have his word on that, and also the fact that reading this, it's got some wild sentences in there, and that's great. Brothers Karamazov is, of course, a famous tome. It is the story of the 3 sons of a big asshole. They all kind of come back into his life after being kind of kicked out of it when in their adulthood, and they develop relationships with him, and then he is murdered, and there's a murder investigation, and the book is about guilt and innocence and religion and faith and reason and guilt and like the character of Russia and all this stuff. And what really, for me, beyond all these big themes, which obviously are really hard to kind of go into without getting really granular on what actually happens in the book, and you know what, I just say, just read the damn thing. It's great. But really, what I can say about Dostoevsky in my experience with this book, which is the only Dostoevsky I've read, is his mastery and his ability to capture these small human kind of both behavioral tics, but also the little thoughts inside your head that maybe you're not even consciously aware of. You don't notice them. They're just these kind of internal cogs and gears that we all have without speaking of them or even necessarily observing them in ourselves. But he observes them, and he notes them, and he describes them perfectly. And you got all these little characters thinking things to themselves and observations of the way they think to themselves. And you see Dostoevsky capture this moment, and you're like, oh my God, I do that too. And I've never thought about it, or I've never like verbalized it or seen someone else put it into words. But yes, this is this immensely intimate and deeply human thing that Dostoevsky has captured and put into text in a way that is incredible. What a book! What a book! The Brothers Karamazov. I had a great time reading that with my friends. Okay, number 2. The return of Italo Calvino to this list. This is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This book is instantly one of my favorite books I've ever read in my life. It is a collection of short, fragmentary stories or poems. I don't even know how you describe them. Each little thing that's like a page or 2 long is a description of a city that Marco Polo is telling to Kublai Khan, a city that Marco Polo has theoretically visited on one of his many adventures. They're all whimsical and fantastical and strange and poetic and like sad and beautiful, and but also just like playful. And interspersed in each sections are little bits relaying the kind of progression of the relationship and conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan. Like early on, it's revealed that since they don't speak the same language, Marco Polo is telling these stories through interpretive dance. And then towards the end, Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, neither of them are speaking to each other. They're having their conversations entirely in their minds, imagining the responses the other is giving, so they don't even need to speak because they're in perfect harmony or whatever. It's great. It is really, really beautiful. I just think you got to read it. I think if you have any taste for fantasy, and I mean like true, like kind of, I don't know, like fairy tale, kind of beautiful, poetic, kind of playful fantasy, you will absolutely love this. One of the best books I've ever read in my life. Instantly very important to me spiritually. I loved it. So I literally just said the number 2, Invisible Cities, one of my new favorite books of all time, important to me spiritually. How on earth could anything be higher than that? Well, let me tell you. Number 1, Gene Wolfe's The Knight and Gene Wolfe's The Wizard, sometimes known as Gene Wolfe's The Wizard Knight. It's a 2-part story. It is, to me, one of the greatest fantasy stories I've ever read. It is a synthesis of pre-Tolkien fantasy. I mean, it is recognizably a fantasy story, but that it feels completely different. It is completely un-Tolkien. There are no elves and dwarves. There are fairies. There's magic, and there's dragons, and there's fairies, and there's knights, and there's battles, but it is a different kind of fantasy. You know, I don't think Gene hates Lord of the Rings or anything, far from it, but I think it is like intentionally an exercise, to my mind, in taking the things that inspired the Lord of the Rings thing, and The Hobbit for that matter, things like classic fairy stories, Norse mythology, Beowulf, the Bible, all of these kind of classic wells and veins of fantasy that led to Tolkien, of course, this professor of linguistics, knowing all these old stories, the Germanic legends, the French legends, synthesizing this all into Lord of the Rings. In Lord of the Rings, I think all of these contributing factors, to look for the Norse mythology, for the Beowulf, for, the kind of traditional fairy tale stuff. If you know where to look for it, you can see it. It is so mixed together that it has become completely a new thing. It is emulsified. The contributing components have been emulsified into one continuous fictional thing. The component parts, you can't really pull them out. Whereas in The Knight and the Wizard Knight, Gene Wolfe has very intentionally, I think, left it chunky. All the parts are there. You can see them all like sticking out of the broth. I'm mixing my metaphors here. But there's one additional element that is completely absent from Tolkien that Gene Wolfe has pulled in, which is the kind of real world interacting with the fantasy world. So this is the kind of the Narnia, a Yankee in King Arthur's court kind of thing, where, the isekai, which is a very old school traditional kind of fantasy thing where a person from Earth ends up in the past or in a fantasy world, is left to do as they will. And so this is a story of a young boy from America at some point in the 20th century anyway. He swaps places, I guess, or he appears in this fantasy world, and there's this guy who says he's his younger brother and starts raising him like he's his younger brother, and he just starts living in this fantasy world. And then later he meets a fairy queen and he falls in love with her, and he wishes that he were a knight so that he could be worthy of her, and she makes him a knight, and by that she makes him a grown man, and he's a big guy, and he's a knight now, and he's like a child's idea of what a knight is, right? Like a big strong man who believes in honor and decency and is kind and all of these things, right? He's like the perfect kind of chivalrous guy, and drops him into a world that is not entirely cynical, not necessarily Game of Thrones, but certainly a world that is moderately realistic in the sense that, knight is a class status. You can't just go around saying you're a knight if you're not a knight, because, you have violated a class privilege. So like, he gets beaten up. He gets, contested at every turn. People don't believe he's a knight. People don't believe that a fairy made him a knight. It is this kind of setting where it's a world of tears. There are like, much like the Viking concept, the Norse mythology conception of the world, there are different layers of reality. At the top is the world where God lives, Christian God, more or less. Below that is the level where the angels live. The third level is the level where the Norse gods live. Important. Fourth level is the level where people live, and that's the normal world. Below that is the level where the fairies live. Below that is a level where the dragons live. Below that is where the devil is. Very important. Putting aside the bottom and the top, I guess the top still, but every level worships the level above as gods. So, to the angels, God is God. To the Norse gods, angels are gods. To people, the Norse gods are gods. To the fairies, the people are gods. To the dragons, the fairies are gods, etc. Except also, that immediately gets contested as well. The fairies and the dragons have kind of decided that they're going to do things a little differently. But for the most part, this is kind of the metaphysics of the world, of reality, and the way that plays together is really interesting. And Gene does all kinds of great stuff with it. And giants, there are giants around, and they're very, very scary, and they're done extremely, extremely well. And then this is the part where I tell you that this book should probably have only been one book, and it obviously is presented as one book in some settings, but there's probably about 1,100 pages total between the two of them. This should probably be like one 800-page book, but Gene got a little too wrapped up in the giants and wrote 300 pages of giant politics, requiring it to be split into two books. This is my theory. I can't prove it, but this is my theory. And to some people, it might be like, boy, 300 pages of giant politics, that's a lot. I don't know if I need 300 pages of giant court intrigue, giant assassination attempts against the giant king, marriage plots between giants and human women. This seems like a lot. And to them I say, cowards all. 300 pages, give it to me. I love it. Giants. I love the giants. They're scary, though. They're scary. I love the giants, but they're scary. Yeah, I think that's about all. That's all I got to say about that. Gene Wolfe's The Wizard Knight, The Knight and the Wizard. My best book of last year. Highly recommend. Check out my blog, thehinterlands.neocities.org. And maybe I'll make some more YouTube videos. Maybe I won't. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you read any of these books. Bye.